Well, good evening and thank you for joining us. This is Walking the Talk. My name is Catherine Achieng'a. Now today we will be focusing on the Asset and Recovery Agency. Just what is it that you know about the Asset and Recovery Agency? How much money has been recovered from the proceeds of crime and money laundering? That is what we will be discussing today, and I will be joined by the Director of the Asset and Recovery Agency, and that is Muthoni Kimani, who will be putting into perspective just some of the things that they're doing, what are the challenges that they're facing, and have they been able to recover some of the money that was illegally acquired. But before we begin the discussion with her, we went out to the public to find out just what is it that they know about the Asset and Recovery Agency. And this is what they had to say. Let's take a look.
I know about Asset Recovery Authority. It's not very much in the news, but as a person who reads newspapers, as a person who goes on the social media, they're trying, only that they're not very forceful.
Hiyo ni kuisikia naisikia, lakini si ati kuijua vile kuisikia. Asset recovery ni ya serikali nimeisikia, sawa hiyo, lakini sijui hasa, sijui terms of leverage vile nafanya kazi, sielewi kabisa.
Nilisikia kuhusu kuko na maybe mtu kwa familia alifariki, alafu hakuwa ameniclose kuko na hii na hii, alafu sasa wanajaribu kutafuta kama anaweza pata anaitwa nani, beneficiaries.
Yenyewe mimi naisikia kwa kusemekana, lakini katika kazi zile wanafanya tunaona hakuna usaidizi wowote unatoka kusaidia mwananchi wa kawaida.
I don't know about that. Yeah.
I know of Asset Authority, I know they exist, but as a young person I can say that I've not interacted with them deeply, so I'm not in a better position to understand the kind of work they do. The only authority that I know we have got TACC.
Well, welcome back. Those are just some of the views from the public, obviously diverse views, but most of them not really knowing what this particular agency does. So we'll get to find out a little bit more about this particular agency and how much they've been able to recover and where has this money been spent. And for more insight on that, I'm now joined by the Director of the agency who is with me today, and that is Muthoni Kimani, who will be putting some of these things into perspective. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Achieng'a.
Okay, let's begin with the views from Kenyans. Most of them not really clear what your agency does. So what does your particular agency do when we talk about Asset and Recovery Agency?
The Asset Recovery Agency is the authority that is established in law to recover all proceeds of crime. This agency was established under the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2009, which came into operation in 2010. The agency did not come into force, was not established until 2013 when I was appointed acting director by the Attorney General with a view of ensuring that the agency is operationalized. I was then tasked to head a task force which was established by the Attorney General to see how the agency could be operationalized.
The journey between 2013 and 2019, 6 years, what have you been doing?
The task force recognized that we had the proper legal framework for recovery of proceeds of crime, especially proceeds from money laundering.
Yes.
And therefore, in 2015, we were operationalized by His Excellency the President when we first went out and filed our first proceedings for recovery of proceeds of crime. That is under the NYS 1, where we froze assets of suspects rising out of the investigations that had been carried out by the DCI, and properties and assets were found to have been procured using proceeds which were from the NYS funds. So from 2015 to 2019,
yes,
we've been able to file cases arising out of the NYS one. We've also been able to file cases against the wife of a KRA official, that is the Pamela Abo case, who had funds in her accounts and could not explain the sources of those funds, and we were given orders to recover those funds. We have been able to recover an apartment which was procured under the Youth Development Fund, that is in Lavington, worth about 48.5 million. We take the value under the law which the asset was procured. We do not guarantee that we'll be able to realize 48.5 million because, as you know, with money launderers, they will pay a price because they're just cleaning money and trying to make it look legal.
So it may not be the actual
value. It may
value.
not be the actual
much
value.
Lower.
But the law requires us to use the value that was used at the time of procurement. So it's value-based, and we've also been able to file many other cases where we have restricted properties of suspects who are under investigations or under prosecution, valued at about 3.5 billion. We estimated about 3.5 billion. These are cases involving NYS2, cases involving suspected drug dealers, some who have been convicted, others are wildlife traffickers, others are human traffickers. So we've been dealing with those kind of cases, as well as cases of fraud, which we get from the DCI as well as other law enforcement agencies.
If cumulatively, perhaps, if you could give a figure between 2015 and now, what are we talking about in terms of what we have recovered? The public is always interested to know, what did we get back?
You know, the public is very interested, of course, with the recovery, and correctly so, because for the longest time, Kenyans have benefited from their criminal activities. We've not really been recovering the proceeds. What we have been doing is restitution, where if a property is recovered from a thief, is returned to the rightful owner, which is okay. But the benefit or the profit that is acquired arising out of the criminal activity or criminal resources is left with the criminal. So the criminal is ready to go serve sentence and come back and enjoy the proceeds. So our business is to ensure that the criminal does not enjoy the proceeds of crime. So what happens is that once an investigation is instituted, ideally it used to be the police would only concentrate on the predicate offenses. The predicate offenses are the ones which the criminal offenses that the suspects are suspected to have committed, whether it's fraud, whether it is corruption, whether it's terrorism. They will concentrate on the main crime because the public is crying out for that. So the financial aspect was always left behind. It was not until the proceeds of crime and anti-money laundering that the issue of money laundering came into fore and ensured that financial investigations are conducted. Initially, we didn't have a lot of capacity within the police force to be able to do these financial investigations. They are complex. So what happens is that there is the initial investigation, financial intelligence, where we get from the financial institutions or from any other sources, but mostly from the FRC and other financial institutions, which will give us, there is these suspicious transactions, these account, the transactions and the behavior of this account is not adding up. The deposits, the behavior and the transactions in that account is suspicious. That is relayed to the FRC. The FRC does its own financial analysis, then disseminates this to law enforcement, including ourselves or the EACC or DCI. The DCI conducts the investigations into the predicate offense, and then our officers start the process of looking for now the proceed of crime. Of course, you will not find the money in the bank accounts. In government, money passes through financial systems, but you will not find, unless in very odd cases, the money has moved on. It's gone through the various processes of money laundering, trying to make it legal. In fact, part of it is you can find there is smurfing, like in the case of one of the suspects where you saw deposits being made into various accounts belonging to either the children or associates. That's how it has been happening.
In terms of a figure, you haven't given me a working number.
The working figure, in terms of cash, the monies that we've restricted in accounts, we have over 287 million restricted in accounts. Recoveries, the ones we've concluded, because it's a process. Recovery is a long and complicated process where you have to first do the police work. That is really deep, it's intelligence-led, and then from intelligence to evidence is a difficult process where you have to seek court orders, where search and seizure orders, which you have to convince the court that this is a suspect account or suspect property, which we need to investigate to see whether there is a substance in the suspicion that we have, that there is a proceed of crime underpinning there, that there is a proceed which has been acquired using funds which are illicit or intended for illicit purpose. So after that, once we establish that there is a property, we then go to court. For now, under POCAMLA, that is under the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering, where we usually use the civil asset forfeiture, because it's much easier than the criminal confiscation. The civil asset only requires that a matter be under investigation or under prosecution. So if a suspect...
So do people perhaps get lost in the process because you choose to go the civil way as opposed to the criminal way?
The law authorizes us to either use the criminal or civil. And for us, what we have found most useful and more efficient is the civil forfeiture. The criminal confiscation is anticipated that a suspect has been investigated by the investigative agencies, and they have found strong, compelling evidence where there is a benefit or a proceed of crime. At that time, the policeman or the investigator has found assets which he believed, or he can reasonably see that they are acquired using acquired using criminal proceeds. Then he gets a restraint order against that property, and that then means that the property is restricted until the conclusion of the criminal case, when the person is convicted and the judge will issue an order confiscating the property or the value of the property that is a benefit arising out of the criminal activity. So that's a long process, because there is even the question of appeal, and right now we even have a Supreme Court. So you don't have you can't
You'll
even
not move
imagine.
as fast as Kenyans would want to see.
And the civil one, once we file, the onus of proof shifts to the respondent. The person suspected to be having the proceeds of crime is the one to come back to court and explain to court that this is a legitimate property. I acquired it using legitimate sources. I've also paid my taxes and I've been a lawful abiding citizen. These people do not have a case. Normally, we find under the law we are required, once we are doing an investigation, to share information with the KRA. The KRA has been one of our best allies in terms of fighting this fight against corruption and economic crimes, because very often you find people, their tax affairs, or entities, the tax affairs are not in order, and therefore the Kenya Revenue Authority has been able to collect a lot of revenue, assess taxes and collect revenue.
Okay, you've mentioned the 287 million. What about the other figure?
The other figure is around 3.5 billion.
3.5 billion
of assets or properties, that is land, which we have restricted around the country in the various cases that we are investigating and following up proceeds of crime.
Perhaps what are some of the places that people tend to hide money once they get it illegally?
In Kenya,
yes,
the first thing is obvious, is land. We are all crazy about land. Mostly it's land, but you also find in high-end vehicles, you have like the many high flyers of Kenyans, the gold scammers with their Bentleys, which costs an arm and a leg. You can find a vehicle worth about 80 million shillings. And then you will find also increasingly people also buying policies, insurance policies, which of course they would hope to then get the benefit, but
so that they don't pay the taxes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they are cleaning the money. The idea is hiding the proceeds of crime, trying to make dirty money look clean and legal, so that you look like you're a clean Kenyan, hardworking, able, who's been paying your taxes and who's struggling and encouraging other Kenyans. So mostly it is land in Kenya. I would say it's land. We are also trying to see where Kenyans try and hide their properties out of the country, but there we require the support of other authorities outside Kenya. Like if it is UK, we have a lot of support from the UK government, because we signed with them, and I think you saw the AG's office, or you've heard of the FRAC. That is the Framework for Return of Assets from Corruption and Crime in Kenya, which aims to improve the way in which assets stolen from Kenya from corruption and crime are repatriated back into Kenya and plowed back for development. This is in line with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and the UN, which requires that countries now increasingly follow assets from corruption and crime and plow them back into the development agenda, socio-economic development.
In terms of your success of particularly working with other countries where people hide money in offshore accounts, what would you say is your rate of success?
Cooperation is a difficult exercise, but I would say that we have received cooperation from countries who have cooperated with us in a few cases that we are involved in, whereby like there is a case involving where suspects are in court here, charged with criminal cases of aiding tax evasion and defrauding KRA. And we have cooperation from foreign governments where we've frozen accounts in those countries. We are also aware of some other cases, of course these are not ours, where as a government, because we sit together with the other multi-agency team, as a government we have cooperation from the UK and Switzerland and the government of Jersey. Those are cooperating very well, and we are working on a way of returning those assets from the so famous Ichuru matter.
All right, let's talk about the debate that we've had in Kenya when it comes to cleaning.
I forgot one thing.
Yes.
We've cooperated very well. We are the ones who seized the gold which we returned to Tanzania. It's the asset recovery agency that the gold which was being was actually it was on transit through Kenya, and we were able through cooperation with the multi-agency to use Pokamla, seize that gold, and it was ultimately returned to Tanzania, because that is where it was stolen from and was being taken to Dubai.
So which other loopholes perhaps have you been able to seal when you work together?
Working together we've been able to seal a lot of loopholes, mostly with regard to the tax evasion, secondly with the beneficial ownership, because now I think you recall from 2015 we now have beneficial ownership rules. We work very closely with the business registration services in terms of business entities and companies to know who are the owners. Then working together with the Kenya Revenue Authority, we look at who is the owner of the company, who are the directors, do they pay taxes, are these companies compliant, and that we've been able to work very well, because even if we do not get any proceeds of crime, the Kenya Revenue Authority is able to flag that person, and then they're able to assess them. We're also able to work together with the DCI very well, where they're investigating. Of course, now the challenge is at what stage they share information with us, because sometimes they have done so much investigation and it's in the press, and the assets are not there for us to really put freezing orders before they then change hands. The time of sharing information is very critical in terms of asset recovery, because then you're able to do a covert act, be able to profile the person, see what are their properties, who are their associates, and in terms of money laundering, we also look at politically exposed persons, because they could be hiding for politically exposed persons. Is not only for politicians, is high-ranking government officials or public officials. That is what you deal with. Myself, I'm also a PEP, because I'm holding the position of a director. I can influence somebody to hold a property on my behalf. So we are supposed to check the PEPs and see if it's a person, who is this person, what do they do, what is the source of their income, how come they have so many properties. Then we can go to court and say this person has properties which really don't add up to the kind of lifestyle that is leading, and he has no known source of legitimate income or employment or innovation. We don't mind innovation.
So how easy is it to really get to the people who are the masterminds of some of these crimes? Because like you said, people will not always have it in their name. They'll always try to look for someone else to hold it in their trust.
Asset recovery is a long and complex process, because you start with a reporting, a suspicious reporting, or a crime has been reported, or even intelligence has come that this is happening. So by the time that you go to see what is this intelligence about, it's a very complicated process, and then you zero in on the real suspect, because it may not be, the one you have been told may not be the real suspect.
It could be a proxy.
It could be a proxy. So it requires a lot of effort and support from all law enforcement. One law enforcement agency I don't think can be able to deal with these matters. In fact, increasingly, it's intelligence led that actually you're able to recover assets. It's very complicated because the olden case of NYS1 where you had the Kaburas and the Irongos and cash being withdrawn, those are gone. We are now going to deal with more complicated legal structures in the Panama style. Then you also, increasingly, there is no cash. So you can't talk about cash. You have to look at the various structures that people will use. You have to anticipate and you have to think about the strategies that you're going to use in terms of tracing these assets. It's a very complicated and long process because you may think you have traced, but people have a legal answer to what you're trying to recover.
I want us to talk about, the debates that we've been seeing a couple of weeks ago, particularly when it comes to cleaning money in the church. Is that a direction that perhaps you're also looking at when it comes to money laundering and just taking the proceeds to church where you can clean them and there are no questions asked?
In fact, that's a discussion we've had for a long time. If you recall, when the former Attorney General tried to put in some regulations, there was a lot of uproar. And that was not, I think he had good intentions because we had then looked at the money laundering terrain and seen that is a possible area where people are doing laundering. In fact, with this, such intelligence do come to us. And we think going forward, we will be looking detailed, we'll be working together with law enforcement, looking into the very details of all these churches. We don't mind people contributing and charities, but in terms of charities, we really have to look at who was that person who gave this donation. What was the source of that fund? And I think it's in other jurisdictions, it's called crowdfunding. Yeah. That's what they're looking into, so that you don't have dirty money coming into the church. Then thereafter, it's withdrawn and it goes back to the launderer. Yes. If it is donations to the church for helping the people, the community, that we don't mind. But if it is money which goes to a church, and then it's going back to the very dirty people, the criminal, then that we will be following. So we will look at church accounts if need be, if we get reports, and see whether these donations go for these funds are expended towards the causes that they're intended, or they're intended to clean money. We will look into that. I think we have the framework and the institutions which can do that very well.
What about the demonetization process? Of course, many people were hoping that we were going to curb some of the money that was out there. We'll talk a little bit about whether it is beginning to bear fruit and just your thoughts around it, but that is after this short break. Of course, we are discussing the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which of course gave birth to the Asset Recovery Agency, and we are talking to Muthoni Kimani, who is giving us some of the insights regarding what they're doing to try and address this particular problem, asset recovery. On this note, it's time for Walking the Talk to take a break, but we will be back in just a bit, so stay tuned. Welcome back. If you're joining us, you're watching Walking the Talk. Our guest in studio this evening, Muthoni Kimani, the director of the agency that is tasked with ensuring that we recover some of the assets that were acquired illegally, just giving us some of the insights of what really she's doing, the challenges that they are facing, and some of the things that they've been able to achieve since they were set up. Once again, it's good to have you. And let's now just talk about, before we went for the break, we were discussing the demonetization process. Do you think it is going to help in trying to clean up, especially when it comes to money laundering and counterfeit money?
Thank you. Yes, I believe that demonetization helped in terms of mattress banking, because I think before that you had a lot about mattress banking where people were said to be hiding money in their houses. So what is the value of that money in your house if it's not in the financial system? It's now valueless. So in my view, in terms of fighting money laundering and crime, that was a good thing, because we know the amount of money that has been released into the system. The central bank now has that data. In terms of investigating anybody, we were waiting for anybody whose account will have been seen to have been suspicious. That's what we're waiting. If we get that, we'll follow them. But I believe it's a good thing, because we have new notes, and we now are able to know what is circulating. I think before, because of the long period, there was a lot of speculation. And if you look at the cases that we had, monies were being withdrawn in cash, 60 million, 10 million, for a long time until these regulations and guidance from the central bank and Kenya bankers came into force.
So to what extent are you embracing technology to try and track some of these things?
Technology is the best thing that happened in terms of investigators. In terms of investigating money laundering, of course, we get the financial intelligence, and there is always an electronic footprint. In government, you use IFMIS. There is no cash paid. Money is withdrawn, it goes through a financial system. Therefore, you'll be able ultimately to look at a transaction that took place in an account or some funds that pass through some account. So that's very useful for us. Without the electronic, without technology, would not be able to do some of the things that we do. Technology has been very useful because that's what we use. In fact, going forward, once we get fully operational, because we are not fully operational, would hope to buy systems which we are able to do better analysis of transactions and connecting, because what we initially get is from one account, but if you look at the accounts, they're interconnected with various accounts in other banks which have different systems. So in terms of technology is very useful there, because we'll be able to then shorten the time for investigations, because we have a very short time under POCAMLA. We have 90 days when we freeze assets, and thereafter we're supposed to then institute proceedings for forfeiture.
All right. There are those people who feel that in government agencies there is a lot of duplication. There's someone who is going to ask, how different is your agency from EACC? How different is it from what the DCI does?
I think first of all, let me explain that as we are asset recovery, the DCI is the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. It investigates all crimes, right from the minor of crimes to the highest of crimes in this country. So he's the one charged with that responsibility, including even corruption. The EACC, that is the Anti-Corruption Commission, that one enforces the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act and the Bribery Act and the Leadership and Integrity. Those are the laws that they enforce. All the other penal laws are enforced by the DCI. For us, we are following criminal assets. And the idea about setting up specific institutions is not duplication, it's actually the need to enhance the efficiency in combating that particular nuisance or issue in the society. In terms of corruption, you needed a dedicated, under UNCAC, you need a dedicated unit for fighting corruption and economic crimes and bribery. So that's why we set up the anti-corruption, and because the whole world is concerned about corruption. Corruption had become too rampant, and it's still rampant even in the world. It's not just in Kenya, that you need just people concentrating on that alone. For us, there are many other offenses and crimes where funds are lost. Like for instance, do you know how much fraud costs in this country? Fraud is the biggest crime that occurs in the world. And the cost of fraud, both in public and private, is huge. I think is it KPMG or PwC who have attempted to give figures, which I will not quote, but they have attempted to, over the years, give figures of what it costs. So some of the things that people think there is duplication, there is actually no duplication. The intention is to enhance the performance of the law enforcement agents and ensure that we fight these crimes from all angles. Like for instance, if a suspect is under investigation, the DCI will use the penal code offenses. We will use the money laundering aspect, proceeds of crime. The EACC will use the ISECA. So if you have, then KRA will use the rungu of taxes. So imagine if when we work like that, can that person get away? What we call white collar crime, they can't get away because they will be caught up by one of the things. The information that may be lying with the DCI may be more useful to the anti-corruption agency, which will use it for framing charges under the ISECA, or it will be more useful for the revenue authority, which will be useful for collecting taxes and building charges for tax evasion. So that's the intention of having the various agencies. And I would like to tell Kenyans that it's not just Kenya that has multiple agencies. Even developed countries like the UK, how many agencies are involved in the fight against corruption? Every other time they're setting up agencies to respond to the needs. These agencies are set up to respond to the problems and the needs of the time. The UK has multiple agencies. GMLIT, those are task forces, the national crime agencies, the crime commission, the economic crimes, commission. There are so many, and they are not ending there. They continue to form them, because the issue of money laundering is very complicated, and you respond to it as how it evolves.
Do you have the capacity to carry out your mandate in terms of human resource, money, to move around and be able to recover some of these assets? Because you're talking about big money, meaning you need to have big money to get to, the people who are actually in this business.
Thank you. I think you've touched on a very raw and serious spot, because for us, we are seriously not fully capacitated. I said that we were not operational until 2015, and even then we are not fully operational. We still have not had the approvals necessary for us to be fully operational and independent.
What is still pending?
The SRC approvals are still pending. So the staff we have here are on loan, including myself. They are on loan from the AG's office, and from the DCI, from the National Treasury, and from the Ministry of Interior. So that's the challenge that we have. We need to have more capacity in terms of the operational side. That is in terms of intelligence officers, in terms of investigators, and in terms of financial analysts. And we'll also need a very special area of an asset manager, because asset management is a problem. We can seize all sorts of assets, land, even a livestock. We can seize running business, but we need managers appointed to run them. And because of looking at the legal framework that we have for procurement and public procurement, we have to think outside the box of how to manage these assets. So those are the challenges that we have. We have challenges in resources, human resources, and as well as mostly human resources for now. We can say thank you to government, at least. We now have an office. Initially, we were all housed in 2 offices in the AG's office. We really didn't have any capacity to follow up the various cases that we have. We have the basics now. What we need is the authorization of our establishment, so that we can recruit the staff, and then we can have proper set targets. This is the area that we are going to set, because now we rely on an agenda driven by other law enforcement, not an agenda driven by us. So although we have our priorities, because we focus on cases where we are trying to implement POCAMLA, that is by having precedent set, that the law is now pronounced by the court, and everybody knows this is what will happen to you when you are accused of having proceeds of crime. This is what will happen. This is the entitlement that you will have in terms of human rights. Those are the things that we want to settle, because those will set precedent, and they will help in implementing the law on anti-money laundering. As well as, we are not focusing on all cases, we are focusing also on high impact cases that then will have the biggest deterrent effect. That's what we are trying to do. That's our focus for the next year.
So that is your strategy towards trying to get the laws in place for you to be able to operate?
Yes.
All right. In terms of the public's input, to what extent are you getting, the public perhaps coming to you and telling you that we know of this particular person who is spending much more than we think they make? Is the public helping you in trying to identify some of the people who are involved in, fraud, money laundering, and just stealing from the public coffers?
Thank you. The challenge that we have as an agency is, of course, before, our visibility was not there, because we were tenants. We were not even tenants. We were actually being housed by AG's office. We didn't have an office, and we didn't have our own freedom in terms of how we operate. Right now, we have our office. What we have, so the public could not really access us. In fact, many people did not know where we are, or what we exist for, and they still don't know. But we've tried to go out and have sessions with them, first with law enforcement, for them to understand how we relate with them and we collaborate, law enforcement. Because even if we are mad, the operations side, the principals have knowledge of what we do, but the operational side, the people who are on the ground need to understand when they call us. If you are, let's say, from another law enforcement, you find a crime, how should you go about identifying a proceed of crime, or who should you call and how should
Yes.
we contact us?
Yeah.
Those are the things that we've been dealing with. The second one is with regard to the public. When there was the African Day of anti-corruption and with a focus of asset recovery, we did get a lot of questions, and we do get a lot of questions when we go on public events such as the Council of Governors meetings, and we did undertake to give them a forum for which they can report to us when they see something. In the US, I think it's the US and UK, if you see something, say something. I think UK says unusual. Now for us, we are telling Kenyans, you are the first police officer, not the one in the uniform. You are the ones who live amongst Kenyans and know what Kenyans do. You are the ones who visit their houses. You are the ones who eat and drink with them. You may also be beneficiaries of those crimes, but
So what are some of the things that perhaps a Kenyan should look out for to know that maybe you need to report this?
you should look out for something that is not sensible, doesn't make sense. Suddenly, your cousin, your friend has a Bentley. From nowhere, there's nothing wrong with owning a Bentley, but let you own the Bentley if you have worked hard for it and if you have paid all your taxes. If you're a lawful abiding citizen, you have not benefited from a criminal activity. I have no issues with rich people, but I have issues with illegal finance and illicit funds. I think that is what we're trying to say, is that in the olden days when I was growing up in the village, anybody who came with a new car, the question would be, anafanya kazi wapi? Where do they work? Amepata hiyo pesa wapi? These days, people don't ask that question. You're too quick to enjoy or even to praise them without asking, what is the source of their funds? Because we want a Kenyan society that is policing each other. In countries like Ethiopia, where land in Ethiopia, somebody will say there is a stranger who has come, let alone buying even a house. Huyu amenunua nyumba, anafanya kazi wapi? Huyu amejenga hii nyumba, anafanya kazi wapi? Where is the money coming from? Is it illicit or not illicit? So we are encouraging Kenyans to be on the lookout. Be your brother, your neighbor's police officer, not keeper, police officer. Because if you protect them, then you're not reporting to us. Report to law enforcement. You have seen something unusual, because by not reporting, you're prejudicing your own security as well as the security of others. Because this criminal is benefiting from money which is stolen from a public institution which was meant to build a hospital, meant to give you services of a road. They pretended to have built a road, but it was not built, only soil was put. Next year, you're still in the same potholes, you're suffering, and you're not able to take your sick people to the hospital. So we are asking Kenyans to report things which do not make sense. Don't be malicious, be factual, because you're also factual. If suddenly, today, I, Muthoni Kimani, buys a helicopter or buys that Bentley, questions will be asked. Even if I work for government, I'm a senior civil servant, I surely cannot afford those kind of cars. And we will be able to then check with the Kenya Revenue Authority, check with other agencies and see where are the sources of this income. So we promise Kenyans that we are going to, we haven't yet procured, secure a portal where they can be reporting to us, and also have mechanisms of them being protected so that we can be able to follow this. And the assurance that we give is in terms of recovering proceeds of crime, we do not need them as witnesses. We don't. All we need is the intelligence. Our officers will then verify that intelligence, investigate it, and see if there are any proceeds of crime. That's all that we need. That is the way the law is framed, because we are not prosecuting anybody. We are going against a property, not an individual. We are trying to recover that property or benefit that is accrued to a person from an illicit source or for illicit purpose.
But given that, you know, our society, are we beginning to see that change? Because you'll tend to see that the people who actually get arrested for, you know, perhaps, or accused of being enjoying proceeds of crime are the ones who actually get elected to office. So how do we, what would be your take on how Kenyans perceive the question of corruption and the way people like relying a lot on handouts?
It's unfortunate that our society relies on handouts, and that is why the government has tried to put in measures for social benefits, so that you don't have extremely poor people who will be intimidated and misused. and you also try and educate Kenyans so that you are also knowledgeable. When you're knowledgeable, you know what is right and what is wrong. We're also trying to change the system of education so that people can ask questions, because I think what had happened, we carried on to a system of education that did not focus on realistic things which will build citizens who are able to ask questions and who are able to reason, so that you are not going to encourage corruption by being happy when I come and I take handouts, I give you handouts, I have my goons who have paid. That's very wrong. So of course, it's very difficult. Justice is very hard. It's not easily tangible. It's not one of those things you can count the numbers, but it will take time. What we are doing is to encourage Kenyans to be satisfied with life sometimes, you know, because if you look at, from my experience, if you look at the people involved in high-end corruption, they are not the very poor, unfortunately. They are not. They are the people like me, people who even have, but want more. It's greed that causes people to want more. So if we build a society that is satisfied, that a society that is able to know what is good and what is wrong, then we'll be okay. But that will take time. That one, I will not cheat you that because by setting up an asset recovery agency or EACC or a strong DCI or strong prosecutor will do that. It will have the deterrent effect. What we are trying to do is, for us, we have laws and we hope to apply those laws, and those laws will then be able to have a deterrent effect. In terms of freezing assets, what we have is to disrupt. First of all, is to disrupt. Yeah. Because if you look at these crimes, it's not a one man, one woman criminal. It's a network. Yes. So when we freeze the assets, we are disrupting that network so that they are not able to use that money. We are denying them the use of that money from distorting justice or interfering with witnesses as well. That's what we try and do. Ultimately, when we take away, we are then sending a deterrent effect to the society. So that's what that is what the law is intended to do. We have ample laws on all this. We are trying to implement those laws, and hopefully, ultimately, we get Kenyans who know if you are caught with this, if you have these assets, they can be taken away and you'll be left poor. Unfortunately, we have not yet reached there because we have cases like some of the cases whereby courts have ordered that we give living expenses, and these living expenses are not living expenses which I was legally earning 200,000, I was living off 200,000. These are figures that parties or suspects have said, I need 150,000 a month, and then delay the criminal case so that the account is completely depleted. So we are trying to ensure that we build precedents whereby the criminals will not be able to enjoy the same proceeds. When we say living expenses, we will look at the person, have the court look at the person. What is your status? If your status was a hairdresser, like we have in NYS, then you can also not say my status was the MD of a senior bank or something like that. Therefore, I get 1 million shillings. No, we want the court to be realistic and be able to give those precedents so that we deny the people the benefit. Because by giving them the very high living expenses, then that means they're enjoying the proceeds of their criminality.
We have the wealth declaration that public servants are supposed to declare. Has it, within the time that you have been in office, has it at the end of the day been effective in terms of trying to go after some of the people who are hiding these assets? Do they declare them in the first place?
The introduction of the wealth declaration is a very good thing. It was intended to track that Muthoni has been employed today as director. At the point of employment, she owned one house, she owned one car, and after 3 years, Muthoni owns an estate in Kileleshwa. She owns another estate in Embakasi, another one in Kariobangi. So that is what it was intended. As to how effective it has been, I will not purport to say it's ineffective or effective, because I don't think a proper analysis has been done. What we can only go by is when we have requested for those wealth. Initially, we would not be able to get the forms, the wealth declaration forms, but nowadays, if you request for them, you get them. So the challenge of access has been overcome. It was there before, but it has been overcome. The effectiveness in terms of how well or how effective they'll be will depend on the kind of vetting that we do on our officers. Everybody knows that maybe you come from a wealthier family than myself. They know that you people owned an estate or some farms or some business somewhere, and then of course then that will be counted, that business, as an accountability mechanisms. What is lacking is the accountability mechanisms within those wealth declarations, and how then you vet them properly to ensure that people don't under declare or over declare, because it can be under declaration, over declaration, or failure to declare.
Informed our time is up, but yes. Looking forward, what is it that perhaps the Asset and Recovery Agency will be doing in the next coming days to just try and ensure that some of these proceeds, the people who actually loot through the public coffers, do not enjoy them?
What we are going to be doing is pursuing our cases vigorously, which we are doing. Those under investigation, we will ensure that we conclude them. Of course, with the limited resources, because I did say with the limited resources, so that we can have more cases concluded. Secondly, we'll continue to engage with other stakeholders. We have been having engagements with the JTI and the judiciary, where we have been sharing with them what we do and what is expected of them. We've also been having engagement with other designated non-financial reporting, such as ISPAC and other stakeholders. We continue to hold those discussions with them. We have also had meetings with the depositories of official records, because we have the National Land Commission, which has data of property, the ownership. Then we have the business registration services of the business and companies. And then we also have the NTSA. We'll continue to hold these discussions with them as to how to fast track the sharing of information when we want it. Because you see, when you write, then you have ceased being intelligence. Because somebody has a record somewhere. They'll just pick the phone and tell the person, swali imeulizwa hapa yako. So you can actually interfere with our investigation. So we'll continue with that. We will continue to pursue first and foremost our finalization of our documents, so that then we can get enough staff, especially for the operations, and then continue to then draft our own strategic plan, because we don't have a strategic plan, because we are still not yet there as an asset recovery agency properly set. And then hopefully we'll be able to have the criminal asset fund fully operational. That is the fund that is set up under POCAMLA for depositing all the funds that are recovered from proceeds of crime, and which will be able to then be posting to Kenyans and say, in this year, this is what we've been able to recover, in the next year, this is what we're targeting, as similar to what you see other jurisdictions doing every year.
Okay. Your parting shot to the Kenyan people, you can just look straight into the camera.
Oh, my parting shot to the Kenyans is to encourage them to be bold and to be patriotic to Kenya, to ensure that they partner with law enforcement more than they have done in the past, and build the trust between them and law enforcement. I think times have changed. We have the political will, because we have the highest political support from His Excellency in this fight. And I think also we do have, and I can say without a fear of contradiction from our point of view, that we have actually given life to POCAMLA. It is now their asset recovery is a settled issue. It's no longer an issue that we have debate as to whether it is constitutional or not. And we will continue to give life to the other provisions of POCAMLA, which have not yet been tested in court. And we believe we are going to be successful, because we also have the support of the judiciary in this aspect. I think we haven't lost a case other than one.
But the Kenyan people want just the very last, the assets that you require, how do they get back into the economy?
The assets that we require, how do they get back into the economy? That you acquire,
yes, that were proceeds of crime, then you've seized them. How do they get back into the economy?
In terms of the assets that we've required, we've recovered. We've recovered. That is the assets which then we put in the criminal asset fund. That will be managed under the regulations which were supposed to be having public participation. I think they were put out by the Minister for Finances under the Public Finance Management Act, PFMA, that will determine where we put these resources. But if I can just share with them in terms of the FRAC, it will be a project that will also send a message in terms of fighting corruption and in terms of sending a deterrent message to criminals, whether they are active criminals or intended criminals. We hopefully will be able to do that.
All right. Thank you very much, Muthoni, for your time. We do appreciate you finding time just to sit down with us and tell us some of the things that your agency is doing to try and ensure that we recover proceeds of, crime and money laundering. We do appreciate your time. Well, we have been talking to the director at the Asset and Recovery Agency, Muthoni Kimani, just putting into perspective some of the things that the agency is doing to try and ensure that some of the assets that are acquired illegally as a result of money laundering, fraud, they actually bring them back to the public coffers, and then they are utilized for various reasons that she has indicated. This is where we put a cap on Walking the Talk. My name is Achieng'a. Thank you for watching, and good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.